Carla with Race Walk. Thanks for joining me. And today I'm going to be doing a review on The Great Influenza by John Barry. And among other things, we're going to be talking about how the flu actually caused the Holocaust. But before we get started, a little bit about this channel. Here we share good thoughts about good words, and on Fridays I host a live Bible study on Instagram at Race to Walk, and then I publish 2 videos a week. I publish a replay of that Bible study video with some study aids as well as a video about books. So if you are interested in either of those things, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you can get updates about new videos. So I actually bought this book probably, I think it was last summer, when we were just still kind of in the early stages of our pandemic. But I've been reading a lot of different things. I didn't get around to it until just real recently. So anyway, just a little bit about the 1918 pandemic. This was actually a flu pandemic. It was a very widespread pandemic and killed, they're really not quite sure exactly the numbers, but between 50 million and 100 million people worldwide. About the 1918 pandemic, I don't know about you, but I had never heard about it until I remember it was not too long after we moved to Houston, and I was just, looking up stuff on the internet and reading different things, how one thing leads to the other. And I came across some articles about the 1918 pandemic, and I was like, wow, I had never read about it. And it really puzzled me. And I had 2 thoughts about it. And the first one was, why didn't I know about this? Because this was something that affected the entire world. It had an impact on the outcome of World War I. Why didn't I know about this? Why isn't this taught? The other thing I thought after reading it was that if this happened again, that it would be really bad, like right here. Like where I'm at, I was thinking, holy crap, because they were talking, from what I was reading, it was part of the reason that it spread so widely was because it went out with the troops, and it was, the beginning of this air travel, and people were more mobile, and that was part of the reason that it became so widespread. The community I'm in is a bedroom community, so people work somewhere else, they go out and they come back. And so we have people that work in all different areas of Houston, and we have a lot of people that work at the airports or in transportation. We have people that work in the medical center. And I was thinking, wow, if this happens again, this would be really bad right here. When we first had the news about the coronavirus and the first shutdown orders, I remember thinking, is this it? Is this it? So as I was reading this, I was talking to a couple of people in my book club, and I was like, did you know about the 1918 pandemic? I mean, was this something that you learned in school? And they said, no, these are people who live in different areas of the country in different age groups, and they didn't know about it either. And my friend Zach said, yeah, we really didn't learn a whole lot about World War I as a whole. So I think if we learn one thing about this pandemic that we're in now, is that how important history is, that we really need to know how things have gone before, what mistakes did we make? In the first months of the pandemic, there were a lot of people that just had a really hard time believing it, like it was just all a fluke, that it wasn't real, and not realizing that we've been through this before. So about this book, this gives an overview of what happened in the epidemic, how and where it started, how it spread, the response, how it ended. This was first published in 2005. It was written by John Barry. This edition was published in 2018, and there's been a couple of updates. So there's some information in here where he updates it about the SARS and MERS epidemics, H1N1. It's been added to since that first publication. But this is a book that George W. Bush read that really struck him that the U.S. needed to be prepared for a pandemic, and that was the beginning of this preparation for a pandemic response. So this is really interesting because I was expecting when I got this that it would start as, how the pandemic started, but it actually doesn't. It starts way before that. And it gives a history of medicine and scientific research in the United States. And I didn't know this. About the turn of the 20th century, we were really pretty backwards when it comes to science and research. And some people may say, yeah, we still kind of are, but I mean, literally, we had no experts at all. It wasn't just the rank and file people. There's an account here where he says that the Harvard Medical School didn't give written exams because most of their students couldn't write. I mean, that kind of thing. If someone was serious about science and research, they had to go to Europe and study in France or Germany to really get that more stringent training. And they talk about the founding of Johns Hopkins University and how important that was in establishing the medical and scientific community in the United States, talks about the different players, the early researchers, the teachers, and that part's really, really interesting. And then he goes into kind of an overview about sort of the discovery of disease and this research and these scientific discoveries. And you see how, like, for inch by inch, they learn more about disease and infectious diseases. And he talks about some of the mistakes that they made and the wrong turns and how certain researchers would kind of got off on a different track. And it's so interesting because he shows the importance of community in the research. He also shows how personalities can get in the way of these discoveries. That whole part is really, really interesting. Then he starts to cover the actual pandemic itself. So the 1918 pandemic was a strain of the flu. It actually was the flu. One of the things he explains in the book is basically how these viruses operate and how they mutate and just how they function on the body. So I want to talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between, what we're seeing now and this pandemic. So obviously, these are two different types of viruses. So the 1918 pandemic was the flu. It was influenza virus. And what we have now is a coronavirus. And he talks a little bit about coronaviruses, and he explains how influenza, the viruses mutate much more quickly, and coronaviruses are more stable. So even though we have tens of thousands of variants out there, it's because we have given this virus today millions and millions of opportunities to mutate. If it had been a virulent strain of the flu like the 1918 pandemic, we would be in a serious, serious world of hurt. The other thing is that some of the things that it's a different virus, but some of the ways that it's impacting people is kind of similar, like, the damage to the lungs. He describes this in the book as the closest thing that they could compare it to was somebody who had suffered poison gas. He talks about how the cytokine storms, this immune system reaction, that very strong immune system reaction is actually what made the second wave in the fall more fatal. Coronaviruses, they originally thought it was a respiratory disease. It will actually transfer. It becomes an infection of the blood vessel walls. And so they consider it now a multisystemic inflammatory disease. That's why it's been such a challenge to get a handle. The treatment is because it affects people in so many different ways. The other thing that was similar is how it affected people mentally. This had really far-reaching impact, and we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later when I talk about how the flu actually led to the Holocaust. But when he was describing some of the symptoms, people were having like the brain fog and not, being mentally resilient, and this depression and some of all the other nervous system problems. That is what we see today with COVID long haulers. The positive thing about this is that it seemed like at least from what he was reporting in this book, is that over time that damage healed. The big differences between the two pandemics, besides the fact that there are different types of viruses, was how quickly the 1918 virus impacted people. So now with COVID-19, the incubation period can be up to 14 days. There it was like just within a couple days. It was a lot shorter. The other thing is it's a different immune response. With COVID, it's the people who are older, whose immune systems aren't as active, that are being more affected by this. Whereas the mutation that came in the fall, that hit young people more severely. And it was because their immune system had that really strong overreaction to the virus that caused all the clotting. In the chapters where it talks about that fall wave, literally it read like a horror novel. I mean, people would be like literally dying in the streets. They had accounts of people who would get on the train in the morning feeling fine, and they would be dead by the time that they got to their destination. It was just crazy. The other thing that's similar is how people responded. So, for example, Woodrow Wilson pretty much ignored it. He didn't really take it seriously. He was advised to not send troops because, of this pandemic. He did anyway. They have an account there where there were just soldiers just dying on ships. I mean, we basically shipped this pandemic all over the world with the soldiers. In certain cities, people wouldn't talk about it because they didn't want it create a panic. Or they didn't want it to affect their business, which is basically kind of the same thing that we're seeing now. So as far as the flu and the Holocaust, after the end of the war, Woodrow Wilson went to negotiate the terms of the treaty. So Germany's allies during that time, they had all pretty much fallen off and had made their own deal. And so Germany was pretty much the only one left on the losing side of the war. And so the French, who have a very long history of drama with Germany, they wanted to hold them accountable for pretty much all of the actions of, them as well as their allies. And Woodrow Wilson held up against that, and he's like, I'm not going to do this. He wanted something that would be, just. So they were in this huge, long, drawn out negotiations, and they were just arguing back and forth. And Woodrow Wilson was holding firm on that. And then Woodrow Wilson caught this virus while he was in the middle of these negotiations. People who were around him at the time said that he just, even after he recovered, he seemed like he lost his mental resiliency. He became paranoid. He really wasn't thinking clearly. He just wasn't quite there. But he didn't turn over the negotiations to anybody else. He kept on. And then all of a sudden, he just caved. And he gave the French representative basically everything that they wanted, which just like literally the war reparations that were required of Germany under the terms of this treaty were just overwhelming. And it was that overwhelming burden of reparations, which they just recently paid off, that really led to this sense of being mistreated and being abused, that in turn led to Hitler coming into power, because they had this sense of us against them. And really, they had reason to think that. They did. I mean, the rest of the world really did put them in that situation. They weren't the only ones on the losing side in World War I, but they were the only ones that got just battered with these reparations, and they had land taken from them, and the seeds of the Holocaust were in that agreement, and things would have been different if Woodrow Wilson hadn't caught the flu. The other thing that was interesting to me as I was reading this, John Barry's really it's interesting the way he explains this, but he really has like this sort of fatalistic, almost nihilistic sort of attitude towards people's actions. And like, for example, he gives an account of San Francisco, which in the second wave, which was just really horrific for pretty much everywhere else. They were very proactive. Their mayor got a jump on it right away. They were united in their efforts to get a handle on it. Divided the city up into blocks, into organized community aid. They required masks. They had quarantines. They did all sorts of restrictions. They shut things down and they had a really low rate of death for the second wave. But then he's like, they were just, they thought that they had beat it, and then but they were hit harder in the third wave. Well, yeah, but he actually even says that they let up their guard. And so second wave, when everybody else is literally dropping dead in the streets, they come through it pretty well. Then when they let up their guard and they stop doing what they were doing in the second wave, then they get hit. But he sees that as you just can't do anything about it. His attitude really more is about just kind of trying to level out the caseload so it doesn't overwhelm hospitals, because the virus is just basically going to kill who it kills. That's basically his attitude, which is pretty much the attitude that a lot of leaders have about COVID now. Which I wonder if they're getting it from this book. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Barry, but entire countries have proven you wrong. Actions can impact outcomes. And there are countries in the world who were operating under the same conditions and who did do the hard work to make sure to shut this virus down, who are living the benefit of that right now. And he goes into, it says a couple times, masks don't work. You know what? Again, you have been proven wrong. If you look at Houston's epicurve for COVID, we had this huge spike that almost overwhelmed the largest medical center in the world. Humongous spike. When you look at why things started dropping, what was the difference? Oh, a statewide mask order went in place. That is literally the only thing that changed. And we still had jackasses that wouldn't wear them, but it was enough that it brought it down. So you're wrong. Masks do work, and you're also wrong that actions can't change outcomes. Absolutely, they do. Even though I don't agree with his health guidance, I do recommend this book, especially if you're like me and don't have a background in science. This, I think, gives an overview, and I think it's really gives an appreciation of how much has to come before a discovery to get it to that point. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I hope you are staying safe where you are and that you're wearing a mask when you're out. And let's just hope for a better 2021 and that we come out of this state of chaos that we've been in. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.